Are you familiar with the Spanish cave, Cima de los Huesos? There's something very unusual about this one. Back in 2013, human remains were discovered in this pit of bones, even though its depth is 43 feet. After some research, it became clear that the cave was the burial place for the victims of the very first killer in human history. Welcome to History Bazaar. Today we take a look at what was the reason for this murder. How was it done? According to the Bible, after God sent Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, they joined together and Eve gave birth to Cain, who became a worker of the soil, and then to Abel, who grew up to be a shepherd of the flocks. In time, Cain made an offering to the Lord of fruit from the ground, and Abel brought the firstborn of his flock with its fullness and fat. The Lord respected Abel's gift, but had no regard for Cain's. And Cain was angry, and his face fell. One day, when the brothers were in the field, Cain rose against Abel and killed him. Abel was the world's first murder victim, killed at the hands of his brother Cain. But now archaeologists have discovered a skull dating from 430,000 years ago, which shows distinct evidence of foul play. Scientists found human remains situated in an unusual location. This location was at a depth of 43 feet or 13 meters. Thus, it was impossible to conclude that the cave housed some of the first humans in the past. In addition, no evidence suggested that the cave was a burial place. The picture of what happened at the cave became clearer. This was simply the location of the first serial killer to inhabit the earth. The first murder was just as brutal as any other. The attacker smashed the victim twice in the head, leaving matching holes above the victim's left eyebrow. The dead body was then dropped down a 43-foot shaft into a cave where it lay for nearly 500,000 years. Talk about your cold case. Paleontologists pieced together the 430,000-year-old skull and reported their forensic analysis Wednesday in the journal PLOS One. Injuries to the skull represent the oldest direct evidence of homicide, the scientists say. As for whether this was the first murder ever to occur, for sure that's not the case, says Naomi Sala, lead author of the study. Scientists can describe this victim as a young adult, but the age and even gender are unknown. In the fossil record, there are many cases of traumatic injury, but not a lot of evidence of killing, says Sala, a paleontologist at the Institute de Salud Carlos III in Madrid. That doesn't mean killing was uncommon before modern times, of course, but fossilized remains of any kind are relatively rare so far back. The last several tens of thousands of years, on the other hand, are littered with grisly scenes. Take the case of Shanidar III, a Neanderthal who lived about 50,000 years ago. A cut on one of his left ribs shows that Shanidar III was probably killed by a spear, making him perhaps the oldest known murder victim before the new find. The latest skull comes from Cima de los Huesos, or Pit of Bones, site in Spain, where paleontologists have found the remains of at least 28 individuals. Who were these people? Well, they weren't modern humans, and they weren't Neanderthals either. Exactly what to call the Cima de los Huesos people has been debated, but Sala and her colleagues identify them as members of the species Homo heidelbergensis, an early human ancestor that gave rise to the Neanderthals. To figure out whether the skull fractures resulted from blows or from the fall down the cave shaft, the team compared the injuries to those from modern cases of violence and falls. A face-to-face attack with a blunt instrument best fits the pattern of injury. The bone showed no evidence of healing, so the victim probably died immediately or soon after the attack. What's more, the two holes in the skull are the same shape and appear to have been made by the same weapon. It's very unlikely that an accidental fall onto a rock would produce two nearly identical skull fractures. Naomi Sala says the weapon was probably something very hard, but we'll never know if it was made of wood or rock or something else. The scientists scoured the site, she says, but didn't turn up any potential murder weapons. There was only one stone tool found at the site, and it wasn't the right shape. Another mystery. What drove an ancient person to kill? Life was hard in the past, Sala says, so there could have been conflicts over resources or any number of reasons for a fight. Even with difficult lives, though, Sala describes Cima de los Huesos people as caring for one another. There were 28 individuals at the site of different ages, she says. We know that some of these people had health problems. One person had very serious pathology in the lower back and probably had trouble walking and moving. Someone had to be caring for these people before their deaths. And while it might not sound like a lovely funeral today, the fact that people living at the site buried bodies by dropping them down the same shaft indicates some sense of ceremonial burial or ritual. The dead weren't merely dragged away from the campsite to decay. Overall, the site paints a picture of ancient people who lived, loved, and sometimes fought together. Sala's take on life with Homo heidelbergensis, they're not so bad. At least they have also good points. At the dawn of scientific research, there were two opposing points of view on the nature of man. Thomas Hobbes suggested that the nature of Homo sapiens is extremely violent, and the entire evolutionary development of mankind is a war of all against all. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that human civilization was built on cooperation and the desire to be a full member of a social group. The debate between these two sides exists to this day. Who is right, Hobbes or Rousseau? What is the real nature of man? During World War II, human remains that contained a skull with odd injuries were found in the Romanian cave of Choclovenia. The remains were around 33,000 years old. Scientists were finally able to deduce the injuries found on the skull after 70 years. Scientists carried out an experiment where they made molds of the head using a material that mimics the properties of real bones. They threw down several molds from various heights, and they also tested several murder weapons on them. Scientists compared the data with CT scans of the actual skull after conducting a vast number of simulated attacks on the molds. They discovered that there were no signs of healing on the skull after the injuries. Thus, the fractures didn't happen after death. Instead, they were likely the cause of death. Also, the blows were administered using a blunt object, which caused the skull fragments to scatter. The only possible hypothesis was that the attacker struck from the front and was left-handed, since the blows were on the victim's right side. This case was ruled as the first killing among Homo sapiens known and uncovered by scientists. According to evolutionary biologists, the root cause of modern violence is natural selection. In the past, our violent, loving predecessors wiped out all the peace-loving ones. Thus, violent genes were passed on for hundreds of thousands of years until they reached us. Hence, it is safe to conclude that both Hobbes and Rousseau were right. Human nature can take up any of two forms, which are to be destructive or to opt to collaborate. Aggression enables us to strive and become the dominant species in the adverse conditions of the primitive world. The collaboration helped us to communicate, invent the culture, and develop sympathy for our fellow species members. Thus, for hundreds of thousands of years to come, violence might just die down and become a thing of the past. Do you think that's accurate? We hope you enjoyed another episode of History Bazaar. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the fastest growing history channel on YouTube.